Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a case that's really been making waves online. It's the shooting of that UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting because you'd think, the reaction to a CEO's death would be pretty cut and dry, but
Wow.
this one is anything but.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so we've got, Reddit threads, news articles, the whole works, a whole digital paper trail.
A lot to unpack.
Exactly. And one of the things that we're seeing in those reactions is, well, honestly kind of shocking.
It really is. It challenges a lot of our expectations, right? Like instead of, the typical reaction of everyone being against this, there's this kind of a wave of support and even celebration around it.
Yeah, it's wild. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Absolutely.
So to understand why, to really get into the why of it all, we got to start with the basics.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork.
So Brian Thompson was shot and killed on December 4th outside, I think it was like a really swanky Manhattan hotel.
Oh, yeah, outside of one of those high-end places.
Yeah, and initially the police were just totally stumped. They had very little to go on.
And you know what they say, when there's a lack of information, that void gets filled with
Speculation.
speculation, exactly. And in this case, there was even early on, they got the murder weapon wrong.
Oh, wow.
Like, it was all over the place. Some reports were talking about a well-rod pistol, which is that's a really rare, almost silent gun.
So something out of the movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then other reports were saying it was a veterinary gun.
Okay, so like spy movie stuff.
It sounds like it, right. And of course, that just throws more fuel on the fire of all these wild theories online.
Oh, for sure.
And it's a perfect example of how misinformation can take root.
And spreads so fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the speed is really the thing.
Absolutely. And then you have, of course, the internet sleuths. They were in their element with this one. They were poring over security footage, building timelines, speculating about the killer's motives, the whole 9 yards. But this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
They weren't super eager to share their findings with law enforcement. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think you got to consider the whole picture right now, right? There's a lot of distrust of law enforcement out there.
Yeah, for sure.
People are afraid, maybe they get caught in the crosshairs, they end up suspects themselves.
Yeah, no one wants that.
Exactly. And then there's this underlying feeling, right, that a powerful CEO, someone like Thompson, wouldn't really face true justice, through the traditional channels.
Yeah.
So they kind of go outside of it,
Operate outside the system.
Exactly. They take things into their own hands.
It's interesting, though, because for all this careful planning that seemingly went on, the suspect, a guy named Luigi Mangione, ends up getting caught.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about this.
Yeah. And get this, he was caught at a McDonald's.
Wait, really? A McDonald's?
McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Of all places, how did they even...
Well, apparently an employee there, saw those photos online,
Okay.
recognized him and turned him in. But here's the kicker.
What's that?
He was caught with the murder weapon, fake IDs, even what looks like a whole manifesto.
Oh, wow. So was getting caught always part of the plan, do you think? Did he want to get caught to spread his message?
It's a good question. It really makes you rethink the whole case. Maybe this was all part of some bigger scheme.
It makes you wonder.
It really does. And then you add another layer to it.
Okay, what's that?
Mangione's online activity. So this guy, he was active online. And on Goodreads, he was reviewing things like the Unabomber Manifesto.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also books about, get this, back pain.
Back pain. Interesting combination.
Right. It's a weird mix. And then his Twitter feed, he was mentioning things like human immortality, spinal fusion surgery, all sorts of stuff.
It almost sounds like he was grappling with some pretty big ideas, and maybe feeling pretty disillusioned with the world.
Yeah, potentially driven by some strong beliefs and maybe even, some personal grievances, especially related to healthcare, which is
interesting because
it links back to the whole, targeting a healthcare CEO thing.
yeah, it makes it seem less random, right? It's maybe there's a connection there.
Right, and that's where this content of his online activity gets really important, especially some of the quotes we found.
Oh, like what?
So in one Goodreads review, he writes, "These companies don't care about you or your kids or your grandkids. They have zero qualms about burning down the planet for a buck. So why should we have any qualms about burning them down to survive?"
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff. It really gives you a glimpse into his mindset.
Right, like burning them down. That's intense language. It sounds like he saw this this act is some kind of retaliation.
Yeah, like a balancing of the scales.
Exactly. But then you have this other side to him, this fascination with human immortality.
Right. How does that fit in?
That's the part that I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. How do these two things, this anger and this fascination with living forever, how do they coexist?
Well, maybe he saw this whole thing, this whole act, as like a necessary evil. Or
Yeah.
he had to sacrifice himself, his own mortality, to expose this system that, in his eyes was causing so much harm and basically, stopping humanity from reaching its full potential.
So it's like he's saying, they're messing with our future. Why should I play by their rules?
Exactly.
Okay, I see. So his interest in, immortality is kind of like the flip side of his despair. He's focused on a better future, so focused that he's willing to go to extremes.
Yeah, and that kind of thinking, that's not new. We see it throughout history, right? Martyrs, revolutionaries, people who believe that self-sacrifice can lead to big change.
It's a powerful idea, but does it hold up? I mean, and what about how everyone's reacting to all of this? The public, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms.
It really is, and it's definitely something we need to unpack further. It gets to the heart of how we view justice, how we see ourselves in the system. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And we're going to dive into all of that right after this. All right, so we've got this image forming of Mangione, right? He's disillusioned. He's into this whole human immortality thing. He targets this healthcare CEO. But the public reaction, that's the thing that's really throwing me for a loop.
It's not the typical reaction, to a violent crime.
Especially not when the victim is, like a CEO.
Right, right. You'd expect a certain kind of response, but there's a lot of empathy for Mangione out there, even some outright support, and that's what makes this case so strange, so unsettling.
Yeah, it really does. So let's break down this reaction a little bit. What are people saying? What are some of the themes that we're seeing pop up online?
Well, one of the most common things you see is this sense of, I guess you could call it vindication.
Oh, interesting.
Like people are saying he got what he deserved, or he was just a symptom of a much bigger problem.
So they're not necessarily condoning the violence, but they're
Not exactly.
saying like he was right to be angry.
Yeah, there's this feeling that Thompson, as the CEO of this massive healthcare corporation, that he represented everything that's wrong with the system, right? The greed, the focus on profit over people, the fact that so many people can't even get decent healthcare.
So it's like Mangini is almost a vigilante in their eyes.
Yeah, like he was striking back against a system that's rigged against them.
Right. And we can't forget that this isn't happening in a vacuum. There's all this stuff going on in the background. Economic inequality, people distrust institutions more than ever. People feel powerless against these big corporations.
Absolutely. People are frustrated, they're angry, and they're looking for someone to blame.
And Mangini has become that symbol.
In a way, yeah, he's the one who dared to fight back. But you have to wonder, is that a dangerous narrative? I mean, are we really going to celebrate violence even against someone who, maybe represents a messed up system? It seems like a slippery slope.
It does. And that's where I think the ethics of this whole thing, they really come into play. Because romanticizing this kind of, vigilante justice, that's dangerous. It
Yep.
could lead to, complete chaos. And it doesn't really address the real problems that caused this in the first place.
Exactly. It's a Band-Aid solution at best.
Right. So how do we even begin to reconcile these two sides, these two points of view? Because on one hand, you have people who are, legitimately angry and frustrated with the healthcare system, which, let's be honest, is a mess.
It definitely has its issues.
But on the other hand, you have, you can't get around the fact that someone died, a violent act was committed. How do we deal with that, ethically speaking?
Well, I think first we have to acknowledge that this case it's tapped into something real. There's a lot of disillusionment out there, a lot of discontent. People are struggling. They feel like the systems that are supposed to be helping them are failing them.
So these feelings, they're valid even if the actions aren't?
Right. And those feelings, that anger, that frustration, it needs to be heard. It can't be ignored.
But at the same time, we can't just say, well, they were angry, so it's okay.
Exactly. Acknowledging those feelings doesn't mean condoning violence. We have to find a way to channel that anger into something constructive, something that can actually create change without resorting to, these kinds of extreme measures.
So how do we do that? How do we shift the focus from, the individual act to the bigger systemic problems? Because that feels like a huge, daunting task.
It is. It's not going to be easy. But it starts with recognizing that these problems, they didn't just appear overnight. This is the result of years and years of, policy decisions, corporate influence, societal inequalities.
So we're talking about a pretty deep systemic overhaul.
Yeah, we need to look at things like, universal health care for starters, stronger regulations on the pharmaceutical industry, ways to reduce income inequality, things like that.
Okay, so policy changes, but also, it sounds like, societal changes too.
Absolutely. We need to foster more empathy, more understanding between different groups, have honest conversations about things like privilege and power, and be willing to challenge the way things are. Really challenge the status quo.
That's a tall order. It almost feels overwhelming. Like, where do you even begin with all of that?
Well, I think this case, as tragic as it is, it's kind of like a wake-up call. It's a chance
Yeah.
to start these conversations, to bring these issues to light.
Right. It's forced us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our society.
And that's why this case is so much bigger than just, one man and his actions. It's a reflection of all of us, of our anxieties, our contradictions, everything.
Okay, so we've talked about the reaction, the ethics of it all, the bigger picture. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that we need to look at, and that's the role of technology, because Mangione allegedly used a 3D printed ghost gun.
Oh, right, the ghost gun.
Could you explain what that is and why it's relevant to all of this?
Sure. So a ghost gun is basically a firearm that's it's assembled from parts that you can often buy online or even make with a 3D printer.
Whoa, so you can just like make a gun at home?
Pretty much, yeah. And that's what makes them so tricky. They're untraceable. They don't have serial numbers, so it's really hard for law enforcement to track them.
So it's like a whole new level of access to firearms and no oversight.
It's a big challenge for law enforcement for sure, trying to figure out how to monitor and regulate something like that.
Right, because it all happens online.
Yeah, and the internet, that makes things a lot more complicated.
It does. It really does. And it makes you wonder, how easy is it to get your hands on these things? And what can we do to keep them from, ending up in the wrong hands?
It's a tough question, and it's one that we're going to have to grapple with more and more as this technology keeps developing.
So it's not just a legal issue, it's a tech issue too.
Absolutely. We need solutions on both fronts, ways to protect people without, stepping on people's rights.
Finding that balance is tough.
It is. It's a constant negotiation.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about Mangione's motives, the public's reaction, the ethical dilemmas, the systemic problems, even the technology involved. But there's one big question that's hanging over this whole thing. Can Luigi Mangione even get a fair trial?
Given everything we've talked about, the attention, the strong opinions, it's a valid question. It really gets to the core of how our justice system works, or if it can work in a world where public opinion is so influenced by social media.
Right, because it's almost like there's two trials happening at the same time. There's the actual trial, and then there's the trial by, the court of public opinion. So can the legal system actually separate itself from all of that noise?
And if it can't, what does that say about us? About our ability to be fair, to find justice, especially in a case like this that's so politically charged? It's a tough question, and one that I don't think has an easy answer.
It doesn't, and that's exactly what we're going to be exploring in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Huh.
So we've talked about everything, the online reactions, the ethical mess this case is, and even, those ghost guns. But where does this all leave us? Like, what's next for Mangione, and what does this all mean for us, for society,
Well, Mangione's legal battle, that's going to be a wild ride, I think. His lawyers, they'll probably argue he was, driven to do this, that he thought he was saving lives,
Yeah.
that he was acting for, the greater good.
Like a twisted hero complex.
Yeah, something like that. And they'll point to, all his online stuff, his rants about corporations and healthcare, all that, to show, that he really believed this stuff.
So they'll try to paint him as like this tragic figure.
Yeah.
A guy who, went too far but was doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, but it's a risky strategy. Juries, they don't usually like, justifications for violence, no matter what the cause is.
Right. And the prosecution, they're going to focus on, the fact that he planned this, meticulously.
Exactly. The premeditation, that's going to be a big part of their case.
So even if he really believed all this stuff, the fact that he, thought it out so carefully, that hurts him.
It does, because it makes it harder to say, oh, he just snapped.
Right. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing.
Nope. And then there's the whole public opinion thing, which, as we've seen, is a mess.
Totally divided.
Yeah, some people think he's a hero, others think he's a cold-blooded killer. It's going to be tough to find a jury that can just, put all that aside and be totally impartial.
Especially with, the media, the internet, everyone's watching.
Exactly. It's like, can the court even function properly with all this noise?
This case could, set a precedent, not just for these kinds of cases, where violence is mixed up with politics and beliefs, but for how do we even do justice in the age of the internet?
It's a whole new ballgame, and it's not just the legal stuff, right? This case, it's like it's exposed this wound in society.
Yeah, all that anger, the frustration.
It's not going to go away just because the trial is over.
So then what? Where do we go from here? What can we do to fix all this stuff? The inequality, the healthcare mess. Because it feels like, if Mangione's actions resonated with so many people, there's going to be others who feel the same way.
Yeah, and that's the scary part, right? What's stopping someone else from doing the same thing? It's a big question, and it shows how urgent it is to actually find solutions, not just talk about them.
So what are those solutions? Where do we even begin?
It's not going to be easy, but I think we need a shift in how we think. We're so focused on me and them, on individuals.
Yeah.
We got to move away from that. We got to start thinking about, the community, the collective.
So more social programs, helping people, making sure everyone has the basics.
Exactly. Healthcare, education, housing, all that. It's about lifting everyone up, not just a select few.
But that sounds like a total system reboot. Is that even possible? I mean, with politics being what they are and all those, powerful people who benefit from the way things are.
It's a huge challenge, but this case, I think it shows us that doing nothing, that's the real danger. We're at a crossroads. We can choose to ignore these problems and just watch things get worse, or we can choose to fight for a better future.
It's a stark choice, but you're right. It's a choice we all have to make.
Yeah, violence, that shouldn't be the answer. We can be better than that.
So how do we do that? How do we get people to work for change instead of, resorting to violence?
We need to talk to each other, listen to each other. Really try to understand where other people are coming from, bridge those gaps between us.
So it's about, finding common ground.
Yeah, and recognizing that we all have a part to play. We can support organizations that are doing good work. We can fight for better policies. We can hold our leaders accountable.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix things. It's about taking action ourselves.
Exactly. And it's about choosing hope over giving up. It's about doing something instead of just watching. It's about talking instead of, just shouting at each other.
This whole deep dive it's been a lot,
Yeah.
Eye-opening, thought-provoking, and yeah, sometimes pretty disturbing.
It is a heavy topic.
It is. But I hope it's made you think, made you question things, and made you want to, to get involved and make a difference.
That's the goal, to keep these conversations going, to keep learning, to keep questioning.
And to remember that, even though Mangione's actions were shocking, they also gave us a chance to look in the mirror, to face some hard truths, and to work together to build a better world.
A world where, justice and compassion, those are the driving forces, not anger and violence.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this journey. It's been a wild ride, but we wouldn't be here without you.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.